The board of the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, is today expected to approve the third facility release to Kenya, East Africa's biggest economy. In the meantime, Ugandan officials are on a global roadshow right now, looking to lure investors into the country's oil pipeline and refineries project. Discussing these and other economics of East Africa with me on the show tonight is Joseph Ochieno, an international journalist and a political economist based in Kampala. Thanks for making the time tonight, about 9:30, just heading to 10 o'clock over there in Kampala. Thank you so much. Let's start with the Uganda oil pipeline project. What's the latest on this and the pushback on funding due to environmental impact issues being raised?
Pushback indeed, Bossam, isn't it? It's a new thing in this area of the region, in this area, as it were. The question of environmental, it's taken the region rather by surprise, the outcry over these environmental issues. But in a way, they were quite right to raise these issues, not only because of the very obvious environmental issues that we generally take for granted, but really because, in a way, some of the campaigners, many of the issues that has not been raised, has been the manner in which land has been compensated, or if not compensated, to the indigenous people who are losing property, losing land in these very particular issues, the corruption around it inclusive. So really, those have been part of the major problems around this. But generally, I think, amazingly, people who would be thinking rightist around many of these issues, or perhaps questioning the environmental responsibility, as it were, of government, many people have said that, look, the West has developed, Uganda needs to develop, Africa needs to develop, we need to develop this oil, and so the environmental outcry is neither here nor there. That said, though, governments have not been particularly responsible in terms of responding to the cries of the ordinary citizenry. By and large, some of my own observation has been that people have not been substantially consulted. In other words, being given the opportunity to take ownership of the entirety of the process. That has been much more of a problem in Uganda, less in Tanzania, but that having been said, it's a project that is now at the moment, unfortunately, unstoppable.
Is it still possible there will be financial closure for this project? Some officials of the Ugandan government are currently around the world shopping for investors who will be willing to come into this project.
I think it will be very difficult for Uganda to fail to get money for a project like this, simply because if you consider what's going on at the moment around the world, everyone else needs oil, everyone else needs energy. If you see what's happening between Russia and the West through Ukraine, it's the case that anybody who's got any of these items is a darling. So by and large, I think they will get closures on this. Money will come either from East, West, or perhaps South and Eastern, meaning China, as it were. Money will be there. The question is the terms of the agreements, by and large, and whether or not, in many cases, I just was looking at some of the records. This oil is going to be around with us for the next only 20 to 30 years, and then after that, we'll be looking back. How much are we spending on this oil? How much are we going to get in terms of returns from this? How much are we going to invest on our populations, on our futures, on alternative economies of this region? Those are some of the issues.
Yeah, your neighbor, big neighbor, Kenya is heading to the elections. Ahead of that, the IMF is expected to release several millions of dollars to the Kenyatta's administration. What are the key issues that Kenya faces ahead of this next month's general election, in your opinion?
The biggest question, the biggest challenge Kenya has always faced has really been a matter of corruption. I was just having a conversation with a young economist before coming on air, and part of the question is that whether or not Kenya or Uganda beats the other, or those days whether or not Nigeria beats the other on the African continent. But by and large, the Kenyan way of doing it is that while the corruption is generally a big issue, they've been rather successful, as I said, to maintain and retain the top slot as the biggest economy on the region. And number two, they've invested substantially in areas which by and large need to be particularly in terms of infrastructure. So for them, generally, if they are able to be sorted with the money which is coming and able to sort out corruption and the question of governance, including the regional governance structure that came in not so long ago, which seems to be working by and large relatively well, in the very likely event that the elections goes through majorly challenged, then there would not really be a big issue. But to say that Kenya is going to be growing faster, better, the 5.5% or thereabout, and better going forward, particularly after the elections, and if the elections go well and there is confidence both domestically within the region and across the world.
Okay, what's really behind the geopolitical face-off between Rwanda and DR Congo, which is the latest entrant to the East African Community bloc? What's at stake here, Joseph?
That's a sad one, really. It's a question of power. It's the power for the strong guys who control this region on behalf of global interests. But that said, I think it's also a question of resources. I think Rwanda and Congo's border questions is one which is directly linked to the big man Kagame, big man Museveni, and big man the interests that have been using these forces. But beyond that, the populations around the borders in which the Congolese of Rwandese background and who seem to want to take a rather bigger pie out of Congo. But beyond this, and the underlying is a question of resources, a huge amount of mineral resources. As you know, until very recently, Rwanda, just as Uganda, have been all of a sudden miraculously exporting huge amount of gold. But most of this gold is the Congolese gold. So really very much about resources. Other than that, part of the background, the conflict that is not talked about is who controls which part of axis of Congo, including Uganda's own interest in that sub-region. That said, though, it would be nice if Congo was allowed to become a part of an East African, integrated East Africa, with the mandate broadly of Congolese, broadly of Eastern Africans, and that the integration of the region, unlike yours of ECOWAS, was one which is very much about peoples rather than that which is seemingly pushed by big interests, and indeed in the case, the big leaders of the sub-region, rather than the ordinary Africans in the Congolese, Rwandese, in that case, Ugandan sub-region. So unfortunately, it's a conflict about power, conflict about resources, and conflicts about who controls what. The vast majority of the people are suffering. So this regional integration is neither here nor there.
All right, well, thank you for your time tonight, sir, and do have a wonderful night in Kampala. Joseph Ochieno, an international journalist and political economist, will touch base with you as Kenya goes into general elections next month.